So I want to welcome you to Camiba Gallery and to our walkthrough with Margaret Smithers-Crump and her exhibit Kinship. And today we're going to be talking about the works on the show as well as some of the inspirations for that. Margaret is a Canadian-born artist who lives and works in Houston, and her work is about, inspired by, and talks about the subject matter of the interconnectedness of the world and nature and the cycles, life cycles. And so we'll dive into that. But what I'd like to do first, Margaret, is that since we're right here at the entrance of the exhibit, and we have a couple of different pieces right here with us, I want to dive right into some of the pieces and talk about them. So right now we have these two wonderful hanging pieces that is called Nursery for Stars,
Right.
1 and 2, right? And they're free floating. They have this ability to spin. Can you talk about the inspirations with these, and then sort of what your thoughts are with them?
Yes. Well, first of all, I've always had a fascination with the universe, with the stars. I grew up on a small 1-acre island in Canada. And I had the absolute privilege, being in Canada, of on clear nights I could see the Milky Way, I could see shooting stars. These particular pieces were inspired by Space Nebula, and Space Nebula is actually Nursery for Stars. And this particular shape has cropped up in many of my pieces. Sometimes it manifests as coral, sometimes it manifests as plants. And when I was looking at images of nebula, what's really fascinating in all of nature is nature repeats shapes and patterns. And when I looked at the nebula, I went, oh yes, that's a shape I recognize. And I equally was fascinated by the idea that that nebula gives birth. And in a lot of my work, those life cycles about death, birth, metamorphosis, all of those changes, and to see something at the micro level go through these life cycle changes, and at the macro level, meaning the universe making this birthing, is fascinating to me. And so that's the genesis for these pieces, no pun intended. And I love when art moves. A lot of my pieces are kinetic, and it goes with my fascination with life cycles. So if something rotates and moves, it underscores that idea that nothing is still. It's always in flux, in change. And one of the things that I did for these particular pieces is I put little tiny shards of mirror with gold leaf that I gold leaf them. Mm-hmm. And so they catch the light, and it just barely underscores that this is a dialogue with the universe, with stars. So it's just meant to be a little tease, shall we say, that this is kind of like a star cradle.
Right. That it's got that light creating or reflecting element to it.
Right. And then, of course, the shadows on the wall are just, like the icing on the cake. So all of those things, for me, make it a very fulfilling and creative exploration.
And the process for these particular pieces, this is a polycarbonate, is that right?
Yes.
And so it's a plastic type material that you're. Can you talk a little bit about your process on these? And because it's different, you've kind of got two different processes that we're showing in the show, or two different ways of presenting
approaches.
Your work. And so this is one of them.
Well, I've been working with polycarbonates and plexiglass since 1997, so a long time. I guess that's almost 25 years. And because of what I do in my day job, I've been able to find pieces of plexiglass that were formerly in frames, and I'm able to recycle them, which is a big plus in the way that I look at the world. So a lot of these pieces that we're going to be talking about today actually are recycled plexiglass and polycarbonate. Well, one of the reasons I love polycarbonate and plexiglass both is that in these particular shapes, I can cut it with woodshop tools, routers, bandsaws. In this case, it's a router. And I can paint on both sides, and the light will come through it. So in other words, it's translucent, which is just wonderful. The shapes happen because, of course, being a plastic product, I can heat it up with a heat gun, and I put on just cotton gloves, and I don't heat it up for very long, just a few seconds, because the heat gun goes to about 500 degrees. And then I can actually shape it with my hands, and if I don't like the shape, I can heat it again and actually change. So it's a wonderful, responsive material that is not finite, because the fact that I can make a change as an artist is very rewarding. It means there's no end of the road where it's an error and I can't go backwards. Yes. So I like any process that gives me a great deal of flexibility to evaluate and constantly innovate and make changes as organically I need in order to go in the creative direction that I'm intuitively trying to get to.
And this process you've used for freeform elements like this. In the last solo show that we had with you, it was the works were hanging from the ceiling and were inspired or were meant to represent the coral reefs and the bleaching of the coral reefs.
Correct.
And it was a similar process of creating the piece.
Yes.
But you also have this process where you affix the pieces to the wall, and they're very sculptural like this, but actually affixed to the wall, right?
Yes.
So I like that flexibility in it too, is that yes, it's beautiful and it's a sculptural element that can hang, but it can also be sculptural elements that are attached to the wall that create these wonderful shadows and this.
Yes.
And so it's not always related to sort of a nebula shape. Like it's very flexible in what you can represent with it or infer with it, right? Yeah.
Right. I always tell people I never know whether I'm a sculptor who paints or a painter who sculpts.
Right. I love that.
Because I love color, and sometimes I'm more in my element when I'm painting a sculptural painting or I'm painting a sculpture. So yes, it offers great flexibility, and I do paint on both sides of the material. Because it gives wonderful depth. So whether you have depth in a sculptural object, or you're looking at a more two-dimensional object and you're looking through the painting, that's very rewarding for me. And again, as I mentioned before, I grew up on an island in Canada, a tiny little island with water that I could look straight down, maybe 20 feet. So a material that allows me to look through it is just a perfect match for me, because it's both water and it's the ability to feel like I can move into something and explore. So this particular painting over here, if I take my hands and I go through the material, you can actually see my fingers move behind it. And many of the colors that you're seeing in here are on the back side. And what's interesting about working on the back side of a surface is I can make just a very tiny line, and it's a line on the back side, but on the front side, it's a whisper of a line. So I'm getting, if you could look at a painting and think of it as sound, I'm getting a whole orchestration of sounds. So where I'm laying on the paint thickly, as sound, that's a rich voice coming through. But on the back side, where some of the colors are just faint, that could be, just a piccolo or, something, you know, that is a whisper. And that to me is very rewarding, that I can stretch out the visual language like that. As far as the sculptural elements, in a painting, it tends to be that the material can give you depth. Oftentimes, I will build on the painting, and then I'll do layers that will come out to you. And at other times, it's more classically a painting where I'm really dealing with painting and drawing. One thing about all the paintings is that I, in addition to having that ability to have marks make this wide, from very faint marks to, you know, heavy paint. The other thing I can do is I can use almost any media. So I can use oil paint, Prismacolor, acrylic paint. I even use makeup. There's just almost no end to what I can use on this material. Here, there's a little bit of collage element that's a little hard to see, but they're little pieces of plexiglass that I have gold leafs. And for me, it's that micro idea of seeds or eggs that are flowing through a channel, and the abstract idea that something that is trying to gain life must pass through a difficult channel in order to then have life. This is called Trial of Valor. It's a little bit cheesy, but it's the idea that to come to life, to actually get to that point to where, you know, you make it into the world, it's quite an odyssey. And so, you know, you have these dark sides, and I'm not really sure why I have the red forms and the light forms, but it's about that polarity of existence, and how even with polarities of existence, things come together and they happen. And I work intuitively, so I don't consciously always know where I'm going with something, but after I've created it, sometimes a week, 2 weeks, 2 months, it's like an aha moment. It's like, yes, that's what I was trying to do, and I trust my instincts. So.
Well, and you work in several pieces at the same time.
Oh yeah.
Right. So there's interconnectedness between various pieces.
There's a dialogue.
So I think related to this piece is this one that we have called a spawning stream.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And this deals with the same sort of subject matter. It's in a similar color palette, and it you know. It ties between the two different pieces that we have, where there's sculptural and then there's flat, right? This has kind of got a sculptural element to it. It's not just a one surface. It's got layering to it.
Yes, it does.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but this is dealing with life cycles.
It is, most definitely. Right. So it's true. This is one of the pieces that is a shaped painting. It's also sculptural, and it's in 2 levels. Here I'm making reference again. In my mind, I'm thinking that this shape that I use frequently throughout all my work, it can be just an abstract shape, or it can then become something more representational, like a fish farm. Again, going back to the island that I was raised on, when I got up in the early morning, our lake was a glacial lake. I could see down 20 feet. The waters were extremely clear. And I was fascinated as a child of seeing the fish come up from the bottom and then disperse. In my entire life, I've had this love affair with fish. I know it sounds odd, but I just have. And I lived in the South Pacific as well, and would go out on the coral reefs, and I would look at the sea life and the fish. And sometimes when I'm, meditating or just trying to find a peaceful moment, I concentrate on fish. I concentrate on them, seeing them in the water, and it's a very peaceful thing for me. But this particular piece, has to do with an almost magical moment of when the fish are laying eggs in a stream. And in my imagination, I'm seeing it at night. I'm seeing it by a full moon. So, you know, you have these cosmic elements in here, this circle, that circle, the circle of life, this constant kind of moving. Again, not only do I have the sculptural levels, but I have some collage on here where I've gold leaf tiny little bits of little pieces of plexiglass that I have put, again, almost infinitesimal pieces of mirror and gold leaf, and they catch the light. And you know, one thing I haven't talked about is the creative process and art for me can be magical, and I'm always wanting to have works be magical. And so for me, I wanted this piece to have that kind of magical feeling. In other words, again, when something is at that point of being able to give birth and the whole thing happens, that's miraculous. That's magical.
The sense of awe.
Yes, the sense of awe. And that the piece would, it's kind of, it's a kind of sacrament, basically.
One of the things I think is also interesting, going back to the shape that you talk about, that in this piece they can be representative of the fish and the spawning process, but they're also structural in creating this area of this. You know, they're creating a form here. But then they also could be like rocks on the
yes.
So they serve in all sorts of different
they
elements.
Metamorphize.
Yeah, they do. Like just depending on how you're looking at this,
yeah.
But they're really, so this isn't really necessarily a literal painting of a spawning stream.
Yes.
It's atmospheric in that it's creating this image of fish. It's creating this image of stones. It's creating, which I love, you know, because you're getting this sense of what's happening here without there being literal drawings of these elements, right?
Yes.
You're being influenced that there's stones here and rocks here and there's fish here and there's you know, all this activity happening. So I love that.
Yeah, it metamorphizes the shape into, like you say, any number of things. They can be, this shape can be as large as a boat, and which I've also done in my work, or it can be as small as a rock or a seed or an egg. Yeah, I mean,
and it could and it can just really be environmental, and as in this piece where it's not necessarily literally anything other than maybe creating the sense.
It's you know, in the most general sense, it's life. In other words, this could be any number of things. It can be insects, it can be fish, it can be fungus, lichen, any number of things. But what it is, it's a kind of highway of life moving, seeking light, seeking channels of exchange. In other words, a lot of my works have titles like Kinship, Network. It's the notion that everything is moving in conjunction with other cycles, and things are shared, things are taken, things are given, and that's what it's like. I said, it's a highway of life, and it really is in the abstract, and it is intuitive. Believe me, I never start out something with a concrete idea of, oh, this is an A, B, C. Never. I start out with a feeling, and then like Alice chasing the white rabbit, I chase it.
Right, just go with it. Well, it's interesting to go to your studio and to watch the process happen, you know, because I'll visit while works are in process, and I'll see them in multiple different stages, and you say, this one's almost there, and I'm like, how do you know? I'm like, it looks there to me, but you've got this sense of this feeling of like, it's not quite there, it's almost there, and I know it, and you just kind of revisit it and chase the rabbit until it's finished, and I just admire that. The ability to know what that is, like where that sense of where the finish line is.
That's true.
Is important. You you know, but because you could overwork things. Like so many times I've done that in my career where I've pushed something too far, and it's like, well, that went too far. But you have this sense of like, well, this is it. This is creating that sense of awe in that piece that I was looking for without being too specific.
Yeah.
You know, on it. This piece is related to the subject matter of life cycles, but I wanted to point out one of the things that I find really, really interesting on this piece is the amount of paint or surface material that you have on it. It's just got so much thickness that adds so much more depth to this piece, and also color, I guess, or there's intensity. There's an intensity to it, right?
Right.
Because of all this extra texture that's on the surface. I
this,
love that.
This has in paint. This piece, I don't know how well it will come through in the camera, but this is one of the few pieces where you literally can look through the piece. It's very glass-like. So you can see into it, you can clearly see the painting on the back side, like a true glass painting, because I'm sure most people have seen glass paintings. But what's great when you put thick paint on the front of it is you get this wonderful dimensional quality to it, because you're clearly looking at a painting on the back side, and then you have this layering of thick paint on the front side. And again, I just have to underscore that that's the orchestration of mark making between, you know, this cascading paint on the front, and then, you know, these colors on the back side. So it gives that great dimensional quality to it. And other things that I do, you know, I know it sounds odd, but a lot of times when I'm wanting something to look watery, I will literally take my paintbrush and I'll flick it. It's a technique I use a lot, and it makes things, you know, quite water-like. Yes, there's a definite richness of color into this piece, and also a confluence of two opposing forces coming together, which for me, I wanted something of high drama in this piece. So there's, you know, the feeling of motion moving upwards, and yet there's a conflict of something very hard meeting it as the flow starts to try to go up. And in any life cycle, there are these obstacles. We're living one right now in COVID, you know, and it's this is called trial of endurance, and it's the idea that every creature experiences trials, great trials, and to be able to overcome that and get over the trial is very commendable and difficult, and I feel we're living it right now, and I felt not only for the last 2 years, but probably for the last 4 years, and particularly in the last 2 years, we are you know,
going through trials. Yeah.
But we'll get over the other side.
So I want to jump to these two over here, the germinations, and these for me relate to also a little bit of the last show that you had with us, in that it was a Cloud Forest series, and they were round works, and it was representative of your trip to Costa Rica and your memories of the rainforest or the cloud forest, and looking through a camera lens, and that's kind of where the circle came from. And so I see these as an offshoot of that. I don't know, is that right? Yes, I mean, subject-wise, I know it's totally different, right? But shape-wise, how did this come?
Obviously, I'm in love with cycles and circles, and celestial forms. But when I started working on these, I had an interesting kind of revelation, and that is, circles are closed, and all of this work is about things not being closed, that we're dealing with life cycles, but life cycles intersect. And so I thought, well, what if I do a circle, but the circle is notched, and the circle is notched because it's intersecting with another life form, because it isn't closed. So in this case, and I found the fact that something entered and exited the circle fascinating for me. It was actually much more interesting than a closed circle itself. And again, the form started out just being intuitive. And as I worked, I thought, I like when I'm doing line, that line represents movement. You start with a dot, you move the dots become line. And I'm thinking in terms of, well, life begins kind of as a dot, and then as it moves on a trajectory. And, I had done this form, and I had done quickly this sketchy line, and I went, oh, I started to feel like something was germinating. And I then, kind of at the exact same time, was working on this piece. And I started with just a couple of these shapes that you see occurring in almost all the paintings. And as I worked it, I began, this came after these shapes, and it sort of, again, intuitive, began to feel like, again, opposing forces. You have one thing starting to happen, and clearly you have another thing that's entering it. And I went, oh, well, that's germination.
Yeah.
So that's how those forms came to be. And I don't know if it will come across in the filming of this, but this is very thick paint through here. And then again, I have gold leaf very subtly on the surface, which catches the light. And the gold leaf that I use in my work tends to be a signal that this is something precious. Whether it's, whether in the last piece we looked at where it's something glittering and kind of moving through what feels like a fluid, whether that's light on the water or eggs or whatever, it's signaling that this is something precious. And that's what's happening here. So it's like eye candy, but it's also conceptual in that it's telling you this is something precious.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, this shape is representative of seeds, right? It's like this germination of seeds, and
right.
And that's the way I'm reading it.
Mm-hmm.
And,
no, that's perfectly valid, and I'm not sure what this form is, but we'll leave it to the imagination.
So talking about the shaping of the pieces, this little salon wall of smaller works are all uniquely shaped, and so talk about that. I know that there's a lot going on right here.
Right.
Yeah. So
right.
Let's dive into that.
So during last February, when Texas had its notorious freeze, I sat in my kitchen, huddled around our stove top where we put a big kettle of water to boil and kind of heat up a small area. So I had my sketchbook, and I started drawing. And instead of drawing a rectangle, and I think it's just instinctual, I started making what I call these shard shapes. And I call them shard drawings or shard paintings. And all of the drawings that I started making had references to two things. And it was stars, the cosmos, and then very tiny things on Earth. Spores, seeds, lichen, fungi. And it's in my imagination, those life forms on Earth had a connection with something, out in outer space. And getting back to the endurance idea, let me just walk over here. The first drawing that I made was based on a life form that clings to the side of a cliff and is drawn to some sort of celestial light, whether it's from the moon, from the sun. It's the idea that light is life-giving, and that something that, is so infinitesimally small, an organism that is small on Earth, makes a connection with something cosmically large that has light. is to me an indicator of how much we don't understand the wider connections of things, and how humans are just this little dot in this vast intersecting cycles of life, whether it's cosmic or microscopic. And they all share this same conceptual framework. This piece up here, I was thinking of the Milky Way, which I love seeing, and I'm sure everyone does. And I was thinking, when plants give forth their seeds to the wind, how much that form looks like the Milky Way. And I wanted an overlay of those two ideas, that you have the shape of the Milky Way, and you have the shape of the seeds as the spores, as the seeds are thrown to the wind. This piece over here obviously has a lot to do with this piece here. I'm going to walk around. Again, this piece is called On the Edge. This piece is called Cliffhanger. Because, and again, both of them have the same notion that they're attracted to a celestial body, but are microscopically small. So these were based on literally hard to see with the eye fungi. This is called Cave Dwellers, and again, it's bioluminescence. I'm fascinated by bioluminescence, and when you look close, there's all these little lights that are going on, in the cave, and then these, I don't know if they're fungal forms, but they're forms that are sort of illuminated. And again, the stars are in the background, and then again you have a celestial reference. In this piece, I used a kind of iridescent paint that catches the light, and like bioluminescence, I wanted it to kind of have a kind of shimmery quality. And this piece over here is a strange piece. I like it very much. It's dealing with I don't know what this. It's a march of life, and then the life either is giving birth or it's dying, and it's going towards the light. And there's something to have this cosmic background of stars, and then to have this kind of, again, march of life, and then what is happening. It's an enigma at the end that we don't know. And I think that is a perfect, we don't know. And I think that question mark on the horizon is something we all contemplate. And that's what this kind of poetic form is about. It's thinking about, well, what does happen? And for me, I had to have the light. I had to have this at the bottom. And again, I don't know the answer to this question, but it's a meditative little, drawing on some very big concepts.
And they all have this light, right? This element of relating to light. Even the Milky Way, they've got this sort of object of life and light. And so most of the works in the show, almost all the works in the show, are very poetic in talking about life cycles and about this idea of interconnectedness.
Yes.
The piece behind you is a form that you've visited before, but for me it's more symbolic of the same subject, right?
Yes.
State of grace. It's like state of grace,
Kinship and harmony.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. This is a very personal piece to me, and I did want to talk about all of these. I did this originally as a drawing on paper back in 1997, and it has resurfaced many times over the years, because if we ever conceptually get to this state of grace, what it means for me personally, because this is a very personal piece. We have polarities. So we have an opposing forces. And when those opposing forces come together and they orbit and they don't clash, they find harmony and they move together, the light can go through. And I hope I achieve that in my life. I'm always wanting to find that that place where at harmony I can have this light that goes through me where maybe I connect. You know, it's a very Zen way of looking at things. And I wish it for everyone. You know, this is like, I guess if I could fly up on a helicopter and throw out pieces of paper to the whole human race, this would be my paper.
Right.
You know, I want them to say, I would like to say to humanity, find that place in the middle where you have balance and, you know, hopefully something positive will flow through that. I know it's very poetic, but sometimes, you know, we allow ourselves to do that. And in all of these pieces, one thing about the plexiglass, and this is recycled plexiglass that, you know, all of this is recycled. When you're doing something like the cosmic, the heavens, and you want depth, a lot of this is painted on the back. So if you really want to go, if I really want to get across the notion of looking at space, that I can make little dots of stars on the back side of the plexiglass and little dots on the front side of the plexiglass. This is probably the only material where you can actually get that depth and look through. A painting on a one-dimensional surface is not going to give you that depth. And this fascinating material. This is on 1/4-inch plexiglass, and a lot of these little, like the light that's moving through here, a lot of those little dots and squiggles are on the back side of the plexiglass, and then some of them are on the front side, and you get this dimensional light. I don't know any other way to create that on a painting except on this, the depth of the plexiglass gives you this tremendous visual step up.
So I think there's we're coming close to the end of our time, and there's so much to talk about with this show that we could keep going on and on. There's several pieces we haven't talked about, but I want to give a chance for some people to ask some questions to see if there's any specific questions. So anybody have any questions they want to ask Margaret? Go for it.
I do.
Yeah, go for it. Yes. Yes.
I would. So one thing that I love about your work is that it's really open-ended in its magical quality, right? You can see stones, you can see eggs, but another thing that is really special about it is that to me, it displays an understanding of the world on a cellular level, right? And I feel like that comes a lot from your dad's worldview, because he was a scientist. And you know, some of the tools you use in your studio, you use like things that only scientists have, you know, and I feel like that's such a special merge in your artwork. You know, you have this magical, artistic view of the world, but it's so counterbalanced with this like scientific grounding. So I wanted to know if you could talk about a little bit about your relationship with your dad and how it funnels into your artwork.
Oh, well.
I know that's a big question as well.
Yes, my father. My father was a scientist, but he also was a painter, which he did, you know, as a hobby. But he was very good, actually. He opened up my mind to everything from astronomy to things at the cellular level. We would have dinner time conversations about amino acids, and it's the fascination with life. And then I think I think my father instilled in me an affirmation of creativity, whether it's a scientist being creative or an artist being creative. It's that notion that as human beings, I think one of our greatest fortes is that we can see this abstract thing in the future that we want to attain, and it takes creativity to get there.
Mhm.
And if he did anything for me, and he did many, many things for me, it's that never betray that willingness to go after something and prize creativity above almost anything else, that and love. Yes, and
Even the sciences are creative.
Absolutely.
You've got to think outside the box.
Absolutely.
To pursue these.
I read. I try to learn a lot about plants, fungus, you name it, because I'm exactly that. I'm trying to, as an artist, make sense of my environment, of my world, use my own particular talent to have it percolate through, and then, be creative with something I feel very passionate about.
One more question. Anybody?
Can you say something about these two pieces on the left, the big ones?
Sure. Well, another thing about this particular exhibition, there is a lot of blue and yellow.
Mhm.
And I think it has to do with light, and it has to do with water, which of course we can't exist without. And this is a piece that the same forms happen, but during COVID, when we couldn't go anywhere, we still to some degree can't, I spent a lot of time, both my husband and I have a garden, both vegetables and flowers, but we also, because we are gardeners, pay close attention to butterflies and birds. And we grow a lot of Asclepias, which is butterfly weed, and monarchs right now need a lot of help.
Mm.
So we have many, many, many butterfly weeds, Asclepias, in our yard. And during the spring, we would be watching the monarchs lay eggs, and they'd eat the Asclepias down to the ground, and we'd run out to the nursery and we'd buy more Asclepias. And so we're hoping, that they form chrysalises. So I went into the studio and I started working on this piece. And I didn't, again, know exactly where I was going with it, but I had started with the blues and the yellows, which I'm so fond of. And as I started drawing this form, towards the middle of it, I realized that I was making references to chrysalises. Didn't even know it. It doesn't have to be a chrysalis. Believe me, it can be anything. But if you look at these forms, it's called metamorphosis, I believe, May and June. And it's because you have things that are moving, and then you have things that are stationary. And here, some things are suspended. Just at the end of the painting, I decided, I think this is a subconscious reference to those chrysalises, but it doesn't have to be that, in all honesty. It's just, I made sense of it this way. It was a circular movement. Most importantly, it's a love of light and then a love of blue. So, and then the texture, and then here's very dramatic. You can see my hand behind that painting. And then, of course, very thick layered paint, and then very thin, just whispers of color behind. So I hope that is, enough of an explanation.
Awesome.
It's a beautiful invitation for all your butterflies.
Yes.
So we're gonna need to end it there. I want to thank you for being with us and for watching. And if you're watching this while the show is still up, we've extended it through December 11th, so the show will be up through December 11th. Make sure and come and see it. And thank you, Margaret, for being here with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.